Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today's video will be part 2 of our watercolor and watercolor pencil rose. Today we'll be working on our underpainting of the rose using our watercolor pencils. In part 1 we did the background in watercolors, so I will put a card here and I will link it in the description as well if you haven't seen that video yet. And be sure to subscribe and come back on Friday when we do our second layer and we finalize our rose with part 3. So let's just get right into part 2. Okay, so now that our background is dry, it's time to come in with our watercolor pencils. But I just wanted to show you guys real quickly how I sort of clean up the edges to my pieces a little bit. So if the watercolor overlaps, and I've done it in a few places, and you're not going to get it completely to come up, but what I'll do is, and this isn't why I'm too worried if the watercolor kind of overlaps on the rose a little bit, plus some of the reflection from the surrounding areas is going to reflect onto our rose. But I'm just going to clean up this area right here. So what I'm going to do is just take my water brush, or you can use your paintbrush, whatever you're using, and I'm just going to go along the edge and get this nice and wet. Now I'm not using too much water that it's going to create a puddle, just enough to scrub that water off, and then I'm just going to dab it with the Kleenex, and it's going to sort of lift it up a little bit. Then you want to wipe off any of the excess color that's on your paintbrush and go ahead and keep doing it until you're happy. And you want to be gentle while you're doing this on the paper, because you don't want to scrub so much that you start lifting up the paper underneath. And that's why I don't typically use like a scrubber brush or something like that. I tend to use either my water brush or like a regular paintbrush that's meant for watercolors, because anything too harsh will cause your paper to peel. And there. So I'm pretty happy with that. We got a little bit of color off there, off the side. And like I said, if it kind of depends on your paper too, and what paints you used, whether you'll be able to fully lift them or just a little bit or what have you. But I'm happy with that, and I just wanted to show you guys, quickly how to do that. So I've got our colors swatched out here that we're gonna use. Now for our deepest, darkest shadows, I'm kind of going between this middle cadmium red and magenta. I really love magentas and oranges and reds together. I did like a little swatch here comparing the two, and I think I actually might use this combination down here and then the magenta in some of the leaves there, but we'll just see. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm just going to start to lighten some of the petals up. Now, if it's easy for you to get confused at which petal you're at, while we're doing this, only lighten a few at a time, because you can always pause the video, rewind it as you're doing this as well. If you're following along, I hope some of you are following along, or maybe you're just watching to get some tips for your own pieces, which is totally fine. Let me know down in the comments below if you are following along or if you plan to. So I'm not too worried about lifting up all of the graphite here, because a lot of our petal edges do have a little bit of a darker edge to them slightly, so I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so I'm going to start with our lightest color, which is cadmium yellow. And I'm going to start in the middle of our rose and sort of work my way out. Usually I would work from one side or top down, but I find for this it'll be easier just to work our way out. And I have this little blank piece of paper here just to put on the side so that I can rest my hand on it as I'm coloring, so I'm not getting into the watercolor or what colors we lay down over here. So I'm going to try to cover up as least as possible, but when I'm working over here I might have to move it over. So we'll start here in the middle. And I'm just going to lay down wherever I think I see this color. And this is a really nice bright color. And again, I'm always using a light to medium pressure, especially in the beginning when I'm first just starting to lay my colors down, because it's easier to correct a mistake when the color's light rather than going down, pressing really hard, and then trying to correct it because you've put down too much pigment or you've put down too much, you know, watercolor, whatever you're using. So it's always easiest to go light to dark. And then once we've got our colors in and our base done, then we can go in, and if you want to burnish, if you're using colored pencils, or, you know, go a little more bold with your colors, if you're using watercolors or colored pencils, you can absolutely do that. And again, some people, you know, think if you push a little harder, more pigment will go on the paper and it's easier to blend. But that's not always true, because the harder you push too, you're pushing down all the little nooks and crannies in the paper. So if that layer wasn't enough pigment to get it to where you want it to be, it's going to be harder to layer colored pencil or watercolor pencil even on top of that, because you've already pushed down the tooth of the paper. And if you've been watching all these tutorials up until now, you know, you're going to hear sort of the same tips over and over, but I want to make sure to say them if it's somebody new that's watching. Maybe this is your first video. So I will try to explain as much as I can as I'm going. And at some parts, I'll be quiet if I have nothing to say. Now, it's not necessarily this yellow color here, but it is a little bit of a brighter orange, so I'm just sort of laying down a super light layer just to help brighten that orange up a little bit when we go on top. And I'm just constantly looking at my reference photo. So every time you see me pause like this, I'm sort of looking. I'm just trying to make sure I'm laying down that color as accurately as possible. And the nice things with flowers is, or most, you know, still lifes that you're doing, it doesn't have to be completely accurate. If you're doing a portrait, then, you know, it sort of has to be a little more accurate. It really has to resemble who you're doing or what animal that you're doing. But really with flowers and still life, you know, unless people are looking at the reference photo, if a petal's out of place, it's not a big deal. If the color's not quite exactly, it's not a big deal because, you know, most people won't notice that or even know that. So that's why I always love flowers if you're just starting out in any medium, because it's really hard to screw up a flower. You know, you can say it's whatever color that you put it. When I'm going around the edges here, I am pushing a little bit harder, sort of a medium to hard pressure, just because I really want to get those lines in place of where those petals are going to be. And even though it looks like I'm scribbling, I'm not. I'm trying to do like little circles. I'm just doing them quite quickly. With watercolor pencils, it's a little more forgiving than colored pencils because we do use water to blend them out. And most watercolors, depending on what brand that you're using, I find blend out pretty nicely. But doing the little circles just gets a little more pigment onto the paper more evenly. If you kind of just scribble it on there real quick, you're not laying down an even layer, and you may end up having to do more layers in the end. But whatever technique works for you, use that. Okay, so I think that's all of our brightest spots in. So that was the cadmium yellow. And then I'm going to go in with our cadmium orange hue. So this is our lightest orange, and I'm sort of going to lay this in to most of the petal areas. And then we'll go in with our darker orange and bump that up a little bit. And even on the spots where it's that light yellow color, I'm going to overlap this color just a little bit, just so that they blend nicely. I'm going to go back in with that cadmium yellow, and I'm just going to fill the inside of this in here. I'm going to continue it just because it is much brighter. So I'm just going to put a light layer of this all down here. There. And we'll continue with our cadmium orange. going to take that cadmium yellow again and just go along the edge of this. And back to the cadmium orange. And I'm going to fill in this. Okay. Now I'm going to go in with the dark cadmium orange. And I'm just going to put this in a few select places. Now, once we get more color onto the petals, like with this layer, it'll be a little bit easier to sort of see where the petals exactly are. Okay, so now I'm going to go in with our, you know what, I'm going to go right to, instead of using the scarlet red, I'm going to go right into the deep red, because a lot of these reds are a little bit deeper. Now I am going to put that scarlet red just right here, and I think that's going to be the only spot, maybe. I'm going to just focus it on the end here. And I'm also going to put just a smidgen right around here. And then I'll go back in with that deep scarlet red and continue filling in. going back in with that cadmium orange, and I'm just going to fill in this little spot down here that I didn't quite get filled in. And then I'm going to go along just the edge here with this deep scarlet red on the bottom petal, just to create a little bit of a shadow. Okay, and I'm going to go back in with that cadmium, dark cadmium orange, and just do a little bit in here around the bottom of this petal here, just to create a little bit of a deeper shadow underneath of it, because I'm seeing it's a little bit darker than what I have. Okay. So I'm going to take this middle cadmium red, and I'm going to go over this little petal down here, because this is sort of our more browny red, and I see it down here. So I'm going to just put it in a few little places. And I'm just glazing over that brighter red we put down. And then I'm going to take our magenta and just put this in a couple little places too. Like right in here, just in our deepest shadows. There, down here a little bit. And I'm just taking that red and that orange here just to deepen up that little spot too. And I'm going to take a little bit over here. And I think that that's it for that. I'm just going to brighten up this little spot here where the yellow is. Because we want to make sure we have enough pigment on the paper before we can blend. And that goes for colored pencils and watercolor pencils. So anywhere I see, you know, the brighter orangey yellow color, I'm just making sure I really get that in there. And I'm going to go in with the dark cadmium orange and just darken up right here because there's a little bit of a shadow here too. Now we don't have to get this all perfect on the first layer because, you know, we're going to blend it out, but the more accurate you can get it, the easier it will be. Okay. And going in with our yellow again, just right down here. And over here. There, so I think we're ready to blend that out. Now, I hope you guys can see we're starting to get some contrast in there. So we'll blend this out and see how it looks and then decide whether we want to do another layer or not. The more realistic it's going to look, the more layering you have to do because you'll get more depth and stuff. But the most I can get, you know, within the first layer is always good. So I'm going to start from this side and work my way over just so I don't end up smearing into any of it. And I'm going to try to go light to dark, but I have my little cloth here that I can wipe off with too. It's just a piece of paper towel. And we'll just start going over everything. And I've explained in my other tutorials that I like doing this with a water brush because I get a little bit more control, and it's easier on little pieces like this because I'm not constantly dipping the brush into a jar of water to get more water. So this method tends to work for me, but you'll figure out as you experiment, you know, use a brush, then try a water brush. Honestly, if all you have is brushes, then use that. You don't have to go out and buy anything extra. Use what you have. And this is one of my favorite parts because you can really start to see those colors come alive. And I'm being careful as I get to the edges because we have to be aware, you know, that orange and red mixed with green will make sort of a more muddier color, even though the green is dry. So just be aware of that and just be careful. And if you go over the edge and it happens and it makes a little bit of a muddy mess, that's okay. There could be a little brown spot on the petal there. Doesn't matter. And the thing I like with watercolor pencils compared to colored pencils, as you can see, we're still getting a really nice like watercolor effect. Whereas the way I like to blend colored pencils using my Gamsol odorless mineral spirits, they blend a lot smoother, and you tend to get a lot more of a smoother look, like you're burnishing, but with less effort. So I tend to like using my watercolor pencils because I get a different look with them. And it's really nice. And it just depends what look you're going for. And you could absolutely go over top of your colored pencils, over top of your watercolor pencils with your colored pencils. And I will have already a Valentine's cupcake tutorial out doing exactly that. So I will try to link it here, and if I forget, I will definitely put it down in the description. So check that out because that'll show you exactly how I do that, how I layer the two together. It's a little bit of a longer tutorial, so I did break it down into 2 videos, but it is really helpful. And especially for a beginner wanting to try to, you know, focus a little bit more on detail and not knowing where to start, you just need to break the steps down really, and I try to do that for you in that video. So I would encourage you to go watch that as well, after you watch this one, of course. And I'm just wiping off the tip of my brush when I'm trying to blend the colors together so I don't get such a harsh edge. I'm really liking the green background that we did with this. It's really making our oranges and our reds pop, because red and green is complementary colors, so they'll make each other sort of pop. So I really like how this is looking. And I'm always trying to drag that dark color like into the dark. So instead of starting in the darks and going to the light, I want to drag the light colors to the dark, because it's easier to drag that dark color back out, but it's hard to, you know, make it go away once you get it out there. I'm just dragging a little bit of that dark color just to make an edge where that leaf sort of rolls over, just to make it a little dark under there. And the cat just woke up and decided he wants attention now. If you guys watched the last video of the cupcake tutorial, you would have seen a sneak peek of the cat and one other of my studio assistants. So if you want to see that, go check out that video. That would be in part 1. At the end, I think I put it in there. So watch to the very end of part 1. I'm surprised he's stayed asleep this long, because it's usually within 10 minutes of me starting a project, he's up and going and wants attention. Now we're almost done this part, so I'll take a break and give him some attention then. Bless you. I find this so therapeutic, just letting the colors all meld together and seeing what you get, because, you know, even though it's pencils, watercolor pencils are a little less predictable than colored pencils. So depending how you blend it, how you've layered them, you're going to get something different almost every time. But I love that about watercolor, and that's why I like to work a lot in wet and wet when I do my watercolor pieces. Because you always get something different, and it always ends up being beautiful. And he thinks so too. Just a minute. And when you're blending with watercolor pencils, I'm just getting a little bit more water towards the end of my brush because it's getting a little dry, and then I just wipe off the rest of it. But when you're starting to blend with watercolor pencils, you want to work fairly quickly, because every time you stop and let it dry, you'll get like a line, and it'll be hard to go over top and blend that out. Now, if you don't mind that, that's fine. But if you want your piece to be relatively smooth, then you might want to, you know, work like I am here, like a section at a time. So, or use a bigger brush if your area is bigger. So if I have one big petal like this, maybe using a little brush like this, I'm not going to get enough water, and I'm not going to get it blended out enough, depending how big it is. So I might go with a bigger brush, like a regular water brush. But because these are such small areas, I can kind of get in there and move the pigment around quick enough. And just getting any excess color off of that. There. So I quite like how our rose is turning out. We'll let this dry, and then I will come back and let you guys know what we're doing. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial so far. If you have, please subscribe and give the video a like, and even comment something down below. It does help my channel out, and it helps people find these tutorials. So be sure to subscribe and come back on Friday for part 3 when we finish up our rose. Thank you guys so much for watching.